So yeah, let's get this thing started here. Thanks for joining, everybody. This is our second meetup for Dallas Multifamily and More. Bigger turnout this time. It looks great. I don't know if it's our team or if it's Dylan or a combination of both. Thanks for everybody.
Probably Dylan.
Yeah, probably Dylan. They're all coming to see Dylan. So gonna share my screen here.
Getting a little feedback if someone wants to mute themselves.
You just go ahead and mute everyone if you can.
Here we go here, move everybody here. So yeah, thanks for joining, everybody. We're the Dallas Multifamily and More group. This is a national brand of multifamily and more started by Jamie Gruber up in Michigan. We're the Dallas chapter, and we actually kind of came up with this format that we feel is, trying to mimic a standard meetup, the in-person, especially with COVID, people are craving networking opportunities. This is an idea that Alif came up with. So basically, we're going to introduce ourselves. We're going to have a 10-minute breakout session, smaller groups, so people can network and get to know each other. And then Dylan Marma, our guest, is going to talk for 30 minutes about underwriting expenses, which is a very kind of overlooked part of underwriting. And then at the end, we're going to have, 10, 20 minutes, and you can kind of stay as long as you want if you want to close out the bar and, the virtual bar, and basically, chat it up and network with people. So this is kind of gives you a background. These are all the multifamily more groups. I recently moved from San Francisco. My name is Nick DeLeon, to Dallas to start up a multifamily business. And I met my partners, Ketty and Alif, through the San Francisco Multifamily and More group. So you can see here, these are the sister chapters. A little bit about us, Lion Real Estate Partners. Again, my name is Nick DeLeon. I'm based here in Dallas. I've been in commercial real estate for about 17, 18 years in various capacities at Nuveen Real Estate and Berkeley Partners. Most recently headed up asset management for Berkeley Partners across the United States, small value add fund in industrial. And when I was at Nuveen, I managed Class A assets, including 900 multifamily units in California and Portland.
Hey, I'm Inifesar. I'm a technical account manager based out of the San Francisco Bay Area. I'm actually originally from Turkey, so prior to that, I was a business manager in Turkey. While, the W-2 job is great, I think we all just want to gain our financial independence. So I'm focusing my off-work efforts into commercial real estate, and I'm focusing on the Dallas market.
Cool. Yep. So I'm Marshall Friedman. I'm based most of the time in Knoxville, Tennessee. I've moved here to pursue multifamily investing full time for about, 8 or 9 months now. So far to date, I've got a 49 unit property in Johnson City and look in Tennessee, and looking to expand on that portfolio pretty aggressively. A lot in the Dallas-Fort Worth market in particular. Before making the plunge in joining real estate full time, I was on investment banking in New York for 2.5 years, and then before that, I was at Duke, where I got my MBA in finance.
All right, hey everybody. So I'm the real Ketty. Alif swiped my name here on Zoom, it seems. So yeah, I'm also based out of the San Francisco Bay Area. Outside of securing the internet, my passion is real estate. So I'm super excited to network with everybody tonight.
Thanks, Ketty. So just a little bit about us, Lion Real Estate Partners. Combined 22 plus of commercial real estate experience. As I mentioned before, asset managed over 900 units of Class A multifamily. We have GP interest, Marshall mentioned, in a 49 unit multifamily in Tennessee, and LP interest in multifamily, 176 unit in Dallas, and some single family homes. And then we also have LP and GP interest in Berkeley Partners funds across the United States. And just a little bit about our guest before we go into breakout sessions. Dylan Marma based in Knoxville, $50 million in principal multifamily experience. We know him through the Jake and Gino Rand Capital community, and he broke off on his own recently, and now he's a principal at Requity Group and a principal at real estate investor relations software company Equity Tree IO. And we use the software. It's great software. You subscribe to it. So yeah. So, we're going to go out to these breakout sessions so we can network a little bit. Just ideas to talk about before we do the breakouts. Where are you from? Where are you planning to invest? And what was the highlight of your weekend? So we're going to give this a shot here.
He's like the Wizard of Oz behind the screen there.
I thought that was you.
Daryl's causing trouble. I just kept shifting you amongst the rooms.
Sweet. I love it.
Gets more exposure that way.
Yeah, absolutely.
Way to do it.
Well, great. Oh, we got Dylan in this room again. All right, awesome, man.
So we're all back.
Email.
It's helpful to everybody.
Oh, everyone. All right, better expand my screen back out.
So we're good here. Dylan, you should be able to share
Yep.
your presentation.
All right, we are good to go.
Thanks, Dylan.
Yeah, let me just make sure I get this thing full screened. Present. All right, awesome. Well, it's great to have everyone on the call. Appreciate you jumping on. It was great to get a chance to break out and meet a few of you personally. And I want to thank Nick and the whole team for putting this on. I think you're clearly providing a lot of value for the whole real estate community, and I think the multifamily and more as a whole has been doing a lot in terms of giving us all the content we need. I think just from staying plugged into these networks and the content being delivered. I mean, there's endless amounts of stuff to learn. So definitely appreciate that. Today we're going to talk about expenses. Almost everything you need to know about multifamily expenses, and I think this is something that you'll never know everything about multifamily expenses, but we're going to cover at least as much as we can get done in the next 30 minutes to give us all high level overview as to how the expenses work. And just to put it out there too. So, well, let me give a quick background first. So for myself, I got into real estate and at a young age. I moved out at 20 years. I actually left school after 2 years and flew across the country from New York to Southern California to work for a real estate investment and education company, where I really got exposed to all the different facets of real estate investing. And like most, I got started off with some single family investing. I was investing out of state into rental properties because in Southern California, clearly not much is going to make sense. And after spending 3 years as a manager within the real estate company I was with, I left to pursue multifamily syndication. I basically had spent about a year of working, I was working probably 65 hours a week, W-2, and every waking moment I could outside of that, I was studying multifamily. I was seeking mentors, and I was trying to get as much of an understanding on the business as it worked, and get enough confirmation from experienced investors that I needed to feel like I wasn't crazy leaving to pursue this vehicle full-time at a certain point. So I left when I had I had my eyes on a 21 unit, which ended up being my first deal that I did with a few partners that was not a syndication. And I moved out to Atlanta. And in Atlanta, I started meetup groups, back when we had in-person meetups. And that was, while I was out there, I was actively hunting deals. And just for anyone that's newer on the call, because I know we have some, I was going through where I was the same kind of headaches that a lot of people go through of, questioning, was this decision the right move to make? Because I was placing offers. It was a hot market. It still is a hot market. I don't know. It's probably more hot, if anything. And eventually things started to break through, and I hooked up with, the right partners, and we ended up syndicating our first one together at 132 units. And since then, over the last few years, it's been kind of pretty consistent with doing deals. At this point, I've worked on about 750 doors, and that kind of gives you a brief summary as to, I guess what I've done at this point. Half the deals I've done have been joint ventures, and half being syndications. But yeah, I think no matter what you're doing, your business plan is going to be, it's good to first understand what your business plan is, especially as we're diving into talking about expenses, because you actually are probably going to be underwriting your deals a little bit differently depending on what your plan is. You're going to be underwriting you're going to be potentially running some of your expenses differently if it's a long-term hold versus if it's something that you're going to be selling in a few years. And we're going to talk about how that looks. We'll also talk about the differences of different size deals and how the expense structures vary a whole lot. Because I know some people are looking for smaller multis and some are looking at the bigger institutional stuff. But yeah, before I get started, I also want to just throw it out there too, as I mentioned, Nick, I always like to kind of have like a free-flowing conversation. So, you know, by all means, you know, one thing I'd say worked well for me early on was I was always the annoying guy that was asking all like the stupid questions that were probably obvious for people that are more experienced. And I think over time, you know, I think I got to a point where I know a thing or two through doing that. But I definitely want to just encourage, like, if you're watching any of this stuff and you're just unsure as to what I'm talking about, or, you know, if it seems over your head, just don't hesitate to jump in and ask questions, or if you have something that you want to comment on or whatever it might be, like, let's definitely keep the conversation open here and see where we go. So anything before we begin? No? All right, so let's dive into it. Few quotes. So this is from an article, the 2019 NAA survey of operating income and expenses, and I'm sure I'll post this in the Facebook group so everyone has the link to the article and all the breakdowns and the graphs after the meeting. But just a few things to hit on here, and I won't go through all of these, but I really want to stress at least some of the early points. Net operating income increased by 5.1%, a slightly lower pace than prior year, but well above average. It was particularly impressive given that operating expenses swelled by 9.8%, the highest year-over-year increase during this cycle. That's pretty crazy, right? To think about expenses going up at 9.8%, right? Obviously, no one's underwriting towards something that has that big of a hike, and there's a number of things playing into that, and that could be tax increases, insurance increases, and things along those lines. But one thing that I want to throw out there, in case you haven't already thought about this, you can actually, when you think about the difference between your NOI going up 5% and your expenses going up 5%, we have to look at how much that's actually going up in a dollar amount, right? Because it's actually, in some cases, you could even underwrite your expenses higher than your NOI, depending on, than your NOI increases. And you always have to realize that your expenses are usually, we'll say, you know, I hate the rules of thumb in some cases, but we'll say they're 50% of your gross income, right? So if your we'll say if your gross income is going up at a lesser amount, then the actual dollar amount that your expenses are going up is still usually far less than your gross income is going up. So just something to pay attention to. It doesn't mean that, you know, you're not in a terrible spot. A lot of times I think expenses do grow faster than income grows in recent years, although both have been growing at pretty high rates recently. Go ahead.
You want us to hold the questions to the end? I'm sorry, I don't mean to interrupt.
What's that? Yeah, go ahead.
No, shoot.
No, shoot, yes.
You know, I mean, this trend you're seeing or whatever, where those expenses are going up every year, you kind of touched on some of those things there, you know, that might be driving that. But I mean, what seems to be like the single biggest factor that's driving those expense numbers up? Is it, you know, labor shortages and having to increase wages for, you know, both property management people and maintenance folks? I mean, taxing obviously is an issue.
Yeah,
but,
yeah, it's definitely taxes, you know, taxes, insurance, and payroll for the most part. I think as property values are spiking and things are getting reassessed more frequently, then you're going to see taxes probably play for the largest increase of your overall operating expenses, right? Because when we're buying property, sometimes the taxes are, you know, going 1.5x or you know, even in some cases, depending on the state, they could double, right, upon purchase at the new value. So I think that's probably has a whole lot to do with it. And then insurance has been on the up and up, and that's probably the second biggest impact. And then payroll too, actually. I don't know. Payroll might be a bigger impact than insurance, given the job market we're in. So I would say that, and I do want to go into that a little bit as we kind of go down some of the different items here. So when it comes to operating expenses per unit, I want to encourage everyone to really start paying attention. There's two ways to look at these. It's probably best to pay attention to them in both ways. But I think most people probably lean one or the other. You can pay attention to it as a percentage, or you can pay attention to it as a dollar amount per unit per year. I tend to lean on the dollar amount per unit per year. So that's what I'm probably going to speak most on as we're going down these, but percentages are also really good. It's not, I wouldn't encourage you to have like a strict rule of thumb where it has to be an exact amount. But I think as you look at hundreds of deals over time, you start to get quick with being able to spot patterns and see when things are way off, right? I have people send me deals all the time, and usually within a minute of looking over it, I can kind of look at how the deal was underwritten and kind of whether or not I kind of agree with some of the cost structure on it from a very basic level, obviously in that short period of time. But you do want to pay attention to these things and start to notice patterns as you're underwriting deals. So this is just kind of a good, I think, visual as to the percentages. So we just talked about, what's causing the increase. If taxes are increasing faster than most other items, and then the same thing with the payroll, and those are already making up over half of the deal, then I would say that those are probably the reasons that we're seeing, that you'd see a 10% spike in 1 year.
Hey, Dylan.
Yep.
So with your comment about how you saw a lot of these expense increases being attributed to kind of the inflation, like the high inflation and growth that we've seen in the last 10 years, do you think those typically follow market cycles? So they might be slowing if we see a recession, or how does that tie into the general market?
Yeah, I think that's a really, really good question. And I think probably the one that's most influenced by market cycle is salaries and personnel, right? If you've been on the property management side of the business, because I've been very in tune with that in the last few years, it's been extremely difficult. A lot of this is pretty market centric, but hiring has been close to impossible, and retention has been really difficult at certain times in certain markets, right? When it comes to finding quality skilled workers, because they have so many options, right? So I think that one, really the only way you can incentivize them is start paying more than the next group will, right? And having better benefit plans and so on. So obviously with the amount of layoffs that we've just experienced as a country, I think, the job market, there's going to be a lot more people that are probably qualified to be quality maintenance laborers or community managers that otherwise would have had a job previously. So hopefully we'll see that go down maybe slightly, but I can't imagine it's go down that much because people kind of get used to what the going wages are and pay is. So it's not like they're going to see a big drop, but hopefully we'll at least see a slowdown in the growth of those. That would be probably the most likely. And when it comes to everything else on here, I mean, I could say the same thing about contract services, potentially. You could probably say some of the repairs. If you're doing contracting a lot of work out, contractors were kind of on their high horse for a bit, right? Where they had endless amounts of work in the last few years. So if things do dry up and there's less available work jobs for them, then maybe you have a little bit more negotiating room, right? So that might help as well. Great question.
One of the things on that right now that's going on is the fact that lumber prices are absolutely soaring, as well as supply chains are slowing down in a lot of different, being able to source like refrigerators, AC, HVAC units, treated lumber is, you walk in any Home Depot around here, and I mean, it's like the shelves are bare. It's a supply thing and a price thing, because even if it is in there, the price of the stud is almost tripled right now. So
right. So when you look at this graph, you basically have, or you look at this chart, there's basically over 850,000 units that were surveyed to be able to pull these average expenses. And you're going to be able to see them both on a percentage basis and a per unit per year basis, right? So when you look at this, again, this is where it all starts. It starts with kind of knowing what you're looking for and spotting patterns. If you're passively investing as an LP, it's the same thing. You want to know these numbers, and that's the way you're going to be able to evaluate deals that are getting sent to you. If you're getting feedback to a broker that's sending you deals, that's the way that you negotiate with brokers. I just actually finished a CCIM course last week, And out of taking all the different courses there, they have a short one that's called, I think, Intro to Negotiations. And I think it was one of the most valuable things, pieces of the material, although it sounds simple, but it's assumption-based negotiation, right? I think that for anyone that's considering, like, how do I, talk down a broker and the price, the only reason that he's thinking that he can sell at this price and you can pay this price is because he has different assumptions. So you want to dive deep into the assumptions, and that can be rent increases or expense increases year over year, but that oftentimes is also your expenses. And they're showing that the deal is being underwritten at a lower expense ratio. So just always keep that in mind, is use that as a tool to to work in through negotiations. But I want to really focus more on each item and the basically what you're seeing on this slide particularly. It's good to see like the percentages and the total amounts. Salaries and personnel, I think a lot of times people are underwriting too low for this. A lot of people are the kind of thing that gets thrown around as $1,000 per unit per year. I think where you're missing on that is you're not factoring in turnover costs. People are going to quit. You are going to have time where you have to have double staff at certain periods of time. You do want to build a buffer in for turnover, and you might have to pay the next guy a little bit more. You also want to be able to build in for insurance costs for your employee insurance, and we're going to talk about that. And then you have workers' comp. Insurance, 238. I think this is a very, very low number. And I'm sure Nick can echo that, because he was telling me that Texas is, I think, three times that in insurance. But one thing we have to keep in mind is who are we interviewing here? These are institutions. This is not how you're going to run a 20-unit deal. This is how institutions run mostly large-scale deals. So, and institutions get economies of scale. This is one of the main expenses that really benefits from economies of scale, because you can get blanket insurance policies over the whole portfolio and spread out the risk across the board. So just be aware of that. Taxes, I don't worry about taxes per unit per year. Throw that out the window. Don't even think about it with per unit per year. It just doesn't, you want to know, I guess like a general amount, but I wouldn't even think about that very much, because that's, you want to calculate it differently, and we're going to get into that. Utilities, similar in that sense. I wouldn't worry too much about it, because this varies so much from location to location and where you're looking at it. Actually, I'd pay a lot more attention to the previous history on utilities, but no, that is kind of fair to say, like in general, you might be around the 300 mark, but again, that will vary. Management fees, this one I always switch over, and we're gonna look at the percentage side. I doubt many of us are gonna get 3% management fees. That's, again, another thing that does come with a little bit of economies of scale. You might be able to in a large multi-deal, but definitely as you grow, that can come down as you have more power to negotiate with large-scale management companies. And we'll talk on what average is. Administrative fees, general and admin, we'll get more into that, but that one is I think is a safer place to have more of a general per unit per year rule of thumb in mind. The marketing side of things, I usually have set prices for every 50 units or so that I'd go up, but I think this is a pretty safe measure to go off of when it comes to marketing, and it seems like they're actually spending a pretty decent amount on marketing in my opinion. But these are also probably quality institutions that just tend to keep their stuff very very well leased up. Contract services, we'll get into that, but I think that's probably a fair number. Sometimes it comes in a little lower, sometimes higher, but again, that's mostly your landscaping. That's making up the bulk load of that, in addition to pest control. And then repairs and maintenance. Okay, this is the big one. This is what I want us to pay attention to on this slide, because this might be an eye opener for some. It may just be it could be a paradigm shift or a different way of looking at things. And I think a lot of us are used to looking at deals, especially if you start off looking at smaller deals. You probably don't even think about like you're having a CapEx budget, right? If you go out there and you buy yourself a 4-unit building, we'll say, you're not really going to have like an allocated CapEx account set aside, and unless you're maybe an accountant or you're extremely granular with this stuff, you're probably going to have it running on an all-in expense thing, right? But as you get bigger and as you go into more of the institutional sized product, there's really two different operating statements in a sense, right? There's the above the line and there's also the below the line, right? And oftentimes when you are purchasing a 250 unit property, you're going to have a very large CapEx budget. Now, what is CapEx? CapEx is not the expense items that do not regularly reoccur that are going into either material improvements in the property, handling deferred maintenance in the property, or anything to that effect, right? So your roof busts down, that's CapEx. Now, where there starts to be a gray area is, what if I want to replace the floor and I don't always replace the floor? Is that CapEx? Does that go above the line or below the line, right? And that is in really the eye of the beholder and the eye of the underwriter, right? And really that's your decision as an operator to determine over time which GL codes you want to allocate different expense items to. So be aware of that, because I know that you would, so say we didn't have this CapEx number below the line, and I'm sure most people on the call are you know, who've ran apartments are well aware of this, but you know, if you're turning an apartment, you're never going to do that for $500, for less than $500 per unit per year, especially if we'll say it's an older vintage. I don't have as much experience operating, you know, anything brand new, so I don't want to speak towards that as much. But I still don't think you're going to, because I think they're going to have higher standards. The newest stuff I have is like 2000s. But we'll say you have, let's just take a 100-unit property, for instance. Okay, what is your average turnover? Well, average turnover is, I'd say 40 to 50%. I have a slide on that as well, but 40 to 50%. And we'll say that, so let's say 50% is actually, I think, the more recent average. So 50% of people move out. Now, the cost to turn a unit, does anyone want to throw out a number? How much does it cost to turn a unit? What's average turn cost?
Bueller.
Yeah, I go $3,000. It depends on the turn you're doing.
No, I'm with you. Yeah, phenomenal. Yeah, like $3,000, right? I think that's a very safe measure, right? I'd say, like, if you're saying it's less than 2,000 on average, then I just can't really get behind that, right? Because you have flooring, you have painting, a lot of it, almost. I don't want to give an exact percentage because I don't know the percentage off the top of my head, but a pretty high percentage of the units that turn need flooring and painting done again, right? Especially everyone's got a dog these days, right? So the floors are always getting torn up, and you know, and it's constantly, you know, you're constantly having pretty high turn costs, right? I've seen them up to $10,000 in turn costs, right? And then you might have some that are low and some that are well maintained, and you know, and if they're well maintained, it could cost, you know, a couple $100. But on average, I think at least 2. I think it's safe to say 3 could be that, right? So say that we have 50% people turning over, and so on 100 units we have 50 people leave. Then we have the $3,000 in average turn cost. It's 150 grand per year in expenses, right? Which again is putting you at $1,200 per unit, right? Am I right on that? Probably maybe $1,500 per unit per year, right? So when you do $1,500 per unit per year, that repair and maintenance of 500 is not going to get you there. So where does the rest come from, and where does the rest go, right? That's the magic question, and it comes from this number down here, the CapEx number, right? So this is how institutions run their businesses. They have CapEx, and they have usually a large amount of CapEx on the front end going into the business. I'd imagine a lot of them do not plan to hold long term, and they will usually be rolling that through, and that will be where a lot of the turn expenses are all allocated. So every time there's a floor done, every time painting gets done, that's all flowing through the CapEx, keeping the repairs and maintenance low, and therefore, you know, it's kind of inflating the value of the property. But again, it's more so industry standard at that point, so they can expect the next buyer is going to be running their expenses in a similar form and fashion to the way that they're doing it. So it's something to definitely be aware of, because I don't know the exact quote, but like you know, Warren Buffett has a joke about the CapEx tooth fairy, right? To where, you know, like he's not a big believer in looking at, like, CapEx doesn't come out of thin air, right? You're either raising that money up front or you're reimbursing it. And what's the average reimbursement, right? Who knows the average kind of CapEx reimbursement numbers per unit per year? 250, 350. Okay. So we have like 250, 350 per unit per year in CapEx reimbursement. So clearly they're usually running at a deficit to, you know, the reimbursement, and that just tells you it's not a long-term hold strategy. So that's why I wanted to bring this up, is because I want everyone to think about, you know, if you're underwriting for a deal that you're going to sell and it's like an institutional quality deal, then you have to be aware of how they're writing these deals. And I'm not encouraging, I don't want to encourage people to be overly aggressive by, you know, funneling everything through CapEx. And I don't want to encourage everyone to be, you know, overly conservative either, but I think you have to really find out where you want to draw that line yourself as an operator. I think if you're dealing with smaller apartments, like I say smaller in the sense of like less than 100, it's sometimes, I wouldn't really look at running them like this. I'd probably have $1,000 per unit per year R&M. You know, I usually do in that case, but on larger ones, you know, you're kind of going to be up against this, and you have to figure out how much extra, you know, how much CapEx you need to start, how long you're going to hold the project, and where do you want to go, and what do you want to draw the line at in terms of what is allocated towards that and what is not. So I found it really interesting. So that's why I wanted to just kind of take a couple minutes to share that. So I don't know if anyone has any takeaways or thoughts or ideas. Go ahead.
Just real quick. So this apartment that you're evaluating here, so we've got garden style, high, mid-rise. You know, so these like stabilized properties that you're buying for cash flow? Is that what you're evaluating here?
Yeah, this is 900, the average of 900,000 units that are currently in operation from major REITs and large scale institutional owners.
So they're buying for cash flow. They're not looking for like value add stuff though, right? I mean, that's not a value add model. This is more a stabilized asset. I
would imagine I think everyone does a little bit of the value add game these days. I mean, you look at a lot of the big buyers, like I think they play a similar game. I'm sure like there definitely are certain REITs that are buying core assets that are holding for cash flow, but I think there's a lot of, even on a large level, that they're always finding some value add. They're probably not going down to the studs on these things, but they're always trying to find some kind of operational.
Right. And just one of the things on those turns too, you know, it makes a big difference if you're using internal maintenance people to do the turns, or if you're actually have an outside vendor that comes in and does the turns, you know, not only from a time perspective, but also from a cost, because, you know, with the outside vendor, you fix that cost. They come in, they give you a price, you know, per unit to do whatever, you know, or you have an a la carte menu, you can decide, you know, what you want to do in those.
Yeah, no, that's definitely a good point. Yeah, definitely outside, you know, doing that internally does save a lot of money on turns. And I will say that is one really good thing about self-managing. You will save a lot of money on turns if you self-manage, because I think you can kind of control how the turns work. You know, and so there's definitely pros and cons, but that's a whole nother discussion, really.
Yes, sir.
Can I ask just a high level like summary or clarification?
Yep.
My takeaways from that were that when you buy the bigger properties, you're up against the institutions that are kind of running thinner margins or have capitals of scale or economies of scale, and they're either holding back their CapEx to hold them through a short holding period, and they tend to not go for a long-term buy and hold where you need to build and have your own reserves, right? Okay.
Yeah. No, that's exactly right. And I think I just wanted to make people aware of it, really not telling anyone like what to do in that sense, but I think it's just being really aware of like how a lot of the big scale model works, because even if you want to buy and hold in that model, you can still do it, but you're going to be buying, you might have to pay a different price to make sense of it, or you might just have to have a lower cash flow because you're showing a higher, you know, OpEx going on, right? Yep. So just being understanding on that. Yep.
Thank you.
Yep, of course. Now we're going to go down the list here. Nick, how are we looking on time?
We're doing pretty good. Probably got a few more minutes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'll go down this list pretty quickly, and then we'll do some more questions if anyone else has them. I just want to hit on kind of what are the expenses, and then just like briefly touch on them if so hopefully there's a little bit of clarity. Taxes. This is only the real estate and property. These are the major line items that you're going to see on most underwriting. So you're going to have total real estate and personal property taxes only. So payroll taxes go under payroll, right? Anything else goes elsewhere. So How do you find this? You can find the millage rate online, but I recommend if you really want a hard and fast and clear answer, you just call the county tax assessor, ask them what the current taxes are, ask for the millage rate, and then be very clear. Like I said, there's no dumb questions. Ask exactly how you calculate the taxes based upon the assessed value of the property, and then how is the property being assessed in that area. In some cases, you might have the actual purchase price multiplied by 0.8 or 0.4. And every area is different. So you want to ask, how often they get reassessed and when they'll be reassessed next. Sometimes they're not even based on the purchase price. Sometimes, you have non-disclosure states, right? So there's a lot of instances where you really want to know the nuances to that particular county. So call the county tax assessor. I want to just keep it simple for that part.
Always ask for a tip if you can get it right.
Yeah, that's a good idea. And then we have insurance. Insurance is just have a good insurance broker and really have two of them. I find that some insurance brokers will just completely miss the mark on certain areas. So you definitely want to always have some backup there and do some research on that. You really want to know your market. You want to know, obviously, is it on a flood zone? Is it a coastal market? Is there hurricane risk? Things along those lines, so you can be aware of what types of insurance to have. And I don't think any of us are going to get $238 per unit right now. So just be well aware of that. It's going to be much, much higher.
You might ask for the loss, or Dylan, ask for the loss runs past 5 years of the insurance loss of the property. That will impact your premium.
Yep, no, that's great. Yeah, the loss runs.
There's two other things. We just been shopping the insurance, and it was interesting that the replacement cost per square foot varied so greatly from one policy to the next, and it's a substantial difference in premium. And the other thing that can really knock your premium out of the park is if there's aluminum wiring in your building.
Yep.
Because it's a super high risk for the insurance carriers. It can be mitigated, but it's expensive.
Yep. Now, when it comes to the management fees, you have larger properties are 3 to 4%, and then smaller properties are 8 to 10%. But let's keep in mind that the larger properties are getting a lot more. That's a much more profitable 3 to 4% for the management company, because that includes it's that plus payroll. Whereas the smaller properties, they're making a much thinner margin, or they're just not nearly as profitable in that 8 to 10% because they're basically having to pay their own payroll internally. I just want everyone to be aware of that. But the 8 to 10% is when you don't have payroll or staff on the property, and large is when you do. And the property payroll gets covered by the owners. So that the payroll costs, this is everything. This is the salaries, the wages, 401ks, bonuses, leasing commissions, and so on. I think we already hit on this. $1,100 per unit is pretty, I think it's light compared to where things are going and where they are today. So I would start to up that a bit. I think this $1,300 to $1,400 number does turn out to be more accurate these days with how things are. But this varies dramatically on property type, because you're going to staff the property usually based on a per unit, based on how many employees, based on the number of units that you have. And we can go into that in a bit here, but also keep in mind Social Security is 6.2%, Medicare is 1.45%, and then you always have workman's comp, and that varies on role experience and the state that you're in. This is a little graph breakdown. So again, when everyone looks at this article, which I definitely encourage just kind of doing a deep dive, because I think we can all learn from this stuff. Like I definitely did. You have the total number of employees, total number of units for the employees. Just pay attention to the fact that when there's less than 100 units, there's more total employees versus full-time employees, because you have more floaters. A lot of times the big management companies, are going to kind of part-time staff your property and have floaters. So that's why there's a bigger discrepancy between these two numbers. And as you get down to the bigger properties, they're all full-time pretty much. So just being aware of that and being aware of who you're going to hire. Usually your first two hires are the property manager, community manager, and then the next one is a maintenance guy. And usually you're not going to run a property without two people. I usually see, right? I guess you could have a community manager and then a floating maintenance. There's different ways to do it, but usually at around the 100 unit mark, give or take, that's when you start to staff the property with on-site payroll, and you're just going to run things a little bit differently at that point. And then, you'll learn as you're growing to 150 units, that's when you might want to bring on a second maintenance guy, and then maybe a leasing agent, and so on. Utilities. This is the total cost of all utilities. Just I want to keep this one simple. Just mostly pay attention to historicals. And I don't like the idea of betting on when the broker says that there's a ability to decrease, water because of a leak or something like that. I like to look at that as like a cherry on top more than anything. But just pay attention to historicals and always expect these things to increase at I'd say standard expense rate increase. General and administration, what this is basically everything going in from the answering service, the office expense, the gas expense from the employees, credit reports, subscriptions, data processing, and so on. I think that the number that they give here is pretty fair for general and administration from what I've seen. So, and that usually only starts to kick in when you start to have on-site management, right? You're not usually going to have general and administration expenses if you don't have anyone in the office running up office supplies and expenses, right? So just be aware of that. If you're doing less than 100 units, that's not going to be quite as much of a factor. But you will have higher repairs and maintenance costs. So repairs and maintenance, I think the true number, especially if you're doing like less than 100 units, I think if you're budgeting to hold a deal long term and you're doing like a 50 unit deal, for instance, like I really would budget $1,000 per unit per year. I think that's a safe bet. And then as you start to get into more advanced or more, you're running deals on like the more kind of sophisticated format, we'll say, then a lot of the stuff, you will start to kind of think about like, what are we allocating CapEx versus OpEx, and how do we run this, as needed. And yeah, repairs and maintenance, you definitely save money, again, being vertically integrated if you can, but there's also other cons with going that route. So
what was
that's
that
our
cost on the bigger? What was that cost on the larger units like that? You said under 100 was about $1,000.
I mean, on the bigger ones, I think this number is fair. Like I think you're running a lot of stuff through CapEx. Like you're not actually going to be able to cover because there's no turnover cost based on the graph that we're looking at. So you're never going to cover your turnover with that. But so I think this is fair if you're allocating a lot towards CapEx. And if you're not, I really don't even want to throw a number out there because I think I want everyone to form their own view on what makes sense for that one.
Just quickly, Dylan, we've seen smaller deals in DFW that have kind of smaller R&M numbers, and it's a red flag knowing that they've basically scrubbed their financials and pushed a lot of the R&M down to CapEx.
Yeah.
Technique that they use before they sell the property. So that, that sounds the alarm.
Yeah, and when you're looking at deals that size, you're not selling these things off to like an institutional buyer, right? It's one thing if you're looking to like a 250 unit, like, B-class building, like, and you're running expenses that way, because you expect that the next guy's gonna do the same thing and you're gonna have like kind of like a certain buying pool. But when you're doing a deal that's say you pick up a 30 unit deal, like the chances are the next buyer is not going to look at it the same way, and you're going to have to kind of be fighting an uphill battle. So it's just being, definitely aware of that, because it can be definitely a red flag. Contract services. You have landscaping. Landscaping is the big one. I'd say this probably makes up for 2/3 of your total contract services. It's just mowing lawn. And if you're in the north, you're going to have snow as well, and that's going to make up a bunch of it as well. So that's really where the bulk of contract services come in play. Pest control also goes under there, and that's usually pretty minimal. But then you might have security, or you might have I guess you could allocate like maybe some like contract septic inspections or something like that under there. But yeah, that's the idea as far as contract services. I think that number is pretty fair. I would just figure out what the landscaping cost is, and you'll be able to kind of back into this pretty easily. And then we hit on CapEx already, so I don't want to go more into the definition on that, but you have that there. And then the operating expenses, again, I just threw that in there just to kind of emphasize the fact that the total operating expenses does not include any one-time extraordinary costs, AKA CapEx. So, that two different things. And then the last thing I wanted to show here is just a graph, because I know we talked about the historic turnover. And if you look at the average turnover rate, it's actually higher than 50%. So it's actually 57%, which is a lot, right? And it looks like it's went down, which is a good sign for us, but it's still not going down far below 50%, it looks like, right? So
Dylan, what's some of the drivers on that turnover? I mean, what are some of the things that you see as far as the turnover that, is it just, trying to, increase, the rents in the thing, or, I mean, just, is there something?
I think this is just normal. I think it's just human nature. I think, people just like to be on the move. Like I've never lived in one apartment for more than 1 year. That's just me, right? There's a lot of people that are millennials, right? They're bouncing around. They have they value portability. And, I think that's what's driving people is a lot of it is just human nature, the way people are wired. I would say that, if you start to really do a deep dive, I would definitely guess that 1 bedrooms are going to turn over more frequently than 2 bedrooms. And you're going to have, it's going to vary a little bit based on the unit mix. It's obviously going to vary based on like the culture of the local area and how people are, operating. And it could turn over, it could be based on the class, but, you could say that people don't want to live in a low end apartment for a long time, but you also could say people will downgrade from high end to low end. Like right now, I'm seeing that firsthand is that, the high end stuff that was leasing quicker for me is harder to lease right now. And the low end stuff is flying off the shelves because people will downgrade and contract, right? So, I'd say it's, I guess I do have my best answer for now. But yeah, that's pretty much the gist of it. And yeah, I'll post the article definitely in the Facebook group so everyone can check that out because a lot of the data we just went over is from there. But I just found it fascinating, and I think it's worthwhile for us all to pay more attention to, no matter where we are in our investing journey. And my company, as you can see, is the Requity Group. So we have I have the website, my email there. So if anyone wants to reach out or jump on a call or anything along those lines, definitely just let me know. Always happy to chat and follow up, and I will stop the share from there. But if we have any questions, I'm happy to answer.
Thanks, Dylan. That was great. So yeah, anyone have any other questions before we do the breakout rooms, next sessions?
This might be a rabbit hole of a question, so feel free to give a very brief answer. But this all looked very apartment specific. Other than things like unit turns, can we expect much of a change in how to look at expenses on like a mobile home park or alternative multifamily properties?
Yeah, it's totally different. Because I'm looking at a lot of parks now. It's basically it's a totally different cost structure. The only way that you would even relate this to a mobile home park is if you're buying a park-owned home park, right? Because there's either lot rent or they actually own the home. If they own the home, it's actually gonna be very, very similar, right? Because you're gonna have to do all the repairs and maintenance. You're gonna have to have the same contract services and so on. But where it gets really kind of complicated to underwrite and look at is when you start to have the lot rent stuff. If it's a tenant-owned home, then sometimes they're mowing their own lawn, sometimes they're not. They're usually responsible for all their repairs and maintenance, and the expenses go very, very minimal, down to like maybe $1,000 or $1,500 per unit per year in some cases. Because even the taxes, are the taxes are much less there than they are apartments. So yeah, that's. But yeah, it's a great question. Yep.
Totally different. I figured it would be a long answer, but I appreciate the context. Thank you.
That'll be the next presentation.
Okay, Dale.
Just one other thing is, I don't know, maybe I'm just not, super smart, but it was kind of an epiphany moment for me, realizing that, for every dollar that you cut your expenses, that's an actual dollar. You can raise the rent $1, but it's not you don't pocket $1. You're only getting 50 cents on that dollar or less, because you got to deduct the operating expenses out of that. And, those operating numbers or those operating expenses, it can really make a huge difference in how your property moves along if you, really keep close tabs on what those are and try to keep them in line.
Yep. We got one from Indira, which is how do you know when an owner or manager turnovers units with $5 to $50 per year, poor care, when buying without talking to tenants, 200 unit, averaging 750 to 1100. So I think the question here is like, how do you identify when the previous owners are just doing a really kind of a really poor job on cutting corners on the turns, and And I guess the best answer I have for that is that you don't always know. You really can't really figure that out without getting in there and touring the units. But that's why in due diligence during your physical inspection, you literally will tour every single unit. And if they've been treating it like crap, then you're going to go in and you're going to, that's when there's certain cases where it's definitely fair. You want to go back to them and basically have them either give you. I always like to say if they're vacant, you get them rent ready. But in some cases, give you any additional kind of costs that would be needed to bring it back to life if they had been kind of deceiving on the front end. But if they're open on the front end and they'll tell you on the front end, then you kind of know what you're getting into. So.
Great. Any other questions? No, we're good.
Yeah.
Oh, you got more questions?
No, not really, not really. I've been listening. I've been enjoying. It's okay. I like the presentation.
Appreciate it.
Thanks, Tom. So you guys can see my screen here. It's just contact information for us, Line Real Estate Partners. You can email any one of us or just go to our website, contact us. You can set up a meeting with me if you like. So let's do the second set of breakout sessions. Feel free to stick around if you want to. If not, you can drop off, whatever you want to do.